Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Investor Frame podcast. I'm your host, Paul Sparks. And on this show, we ask successful real estate investors and entrepreneurs to share their stories so we can learn from their experiences and get closer to the things that we want in life. Today, I'm here with Mike Kehoe. He is a new friend of mine and a new Whale Club member. He's here to talk a little bit about his journey in entrepreneurship. He was a career sales guy and then got married and realized that's not something he wanted to do. So for the last 10 years, he's been doing all sorts of cool entrepreneurial ventures, some stuff in the fintech world. Now he does a whole bunch of stuff in real estate with his partner, Tim. They invest in the Raleigh, North Carolina market and are doing all sorts of wholesaling and things like this. And so I'm excited to have Mike share his story because he is learning the solvable problem and all this stuff right now. But, he's been living a lot of these things for the last 10 years. So anyways, welcome in, Mike. It's great to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man. I'm looking forward to this.
So why don't we start off like we start off every call with a 6-word update?
Yeah, cool. So my 6-word update is also going to be the assignment that we had in the Whale Club, but it's going to be create your rules or expect chaos.
Ooh, create your rules or expect chaos. Well, we'll expand on it a little later today, but tell me more about that.
Yeah, man. So I get in my entrepreneurial journey, early on, and I'd say the first half, I would get into situations, get into businesses and not have any rules in place. I always have a partner in every business that I have. And if you don't create rules and put those in place beforehand and set expectations up front, it's absolutely chaotic. The business just kind of morphs into its own thing, has its own life, and it becomes something that you don't even want to be a part of anymore. And it's just absolutely draining. And so that's just an example from the business front. And then I need to do that on, from personal front as well. I have to operate my life based off of being, having my set disciplines, starting my day a certain way in order for me to be successful.
So I struggle with that too, just taking off into business or taking off into something. And my gut has always been, well, let's just do it. Let's give it a shot, and you just start doing things and trying to make up the rules along the way. Why do you think that a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with that?
Oh man. I think a lot of us just aren't good at gathering the data on the front end, right? That's not something that we're super interested in it. And I've heard you say you just want it now. I want the information and I just want to run with it. And that's kind of what I do, I'm like, oh, wow, this seems like a great idea. And when I work with people that are the data gatherers, more intentional in the past, and they're slow, it just bothers the hell out of me. It's just it has in the past. It's I'm like, why don't you get what I see here? And, why don't you just want to move as fast as me? But now I totally understand because I've been doing this for 10 years. It's just anytime I haven't done that and I've just jumped right in, most of the time, it just isn't successful.
And how does this play in with some of the rules that we define up front? And I know that, you're reading this book or you've already read Rigging the Game, and Dan calls this the commissioner frame, and it's we have to think of ourselves as the commissioners of our own league, and in order to play a game, the commissioner has to set the rules, and it doesn't make much sense to just start making the rules up as you go. So are you comfortable sharing maybe some of the rules that you've set in place to avoid creating this chaos?
Yeah. So, there's little micro stories within the business as well. So I can look at it from on a high level and look at the business and how we set our rules there. But then we also have rules when we go to hire someone and those types of things. So there's rules all throughout, the different parts of the organization. A good example of we just transitioned one of our acquisitions managers to the territory manager role, which is an upgrade for him. And we've tried a new position with him before, and he needs all of the data to feel comfortable. He needs all of the rules set up front to feel comfortable, and most employees do, of course, right? And historically, what we did is we just said, okay, this is going to be your new position. You need to hit these goals. And they were just like one goal, like a revenue goal. Now go for it. And we got super dissatisfied. He was not happy in the role. Like it just didn't work out. And so this time, after reading the book, joining the group, we're doing things differently. We're making sure everything is dialed in. So, one of them is have a trial period up front, like have a 90 to 120 day trial period up front. We're like going to say like, we're going to try this out. This is the role description. These are the responsibilities. These are the KPIs. Just give him all the details that he absolutely needs, that we took a ton of time, spent a ton of time creating. And then say, hey, this is a trial and there's going to be trial compensation during this period. And, it might not work. We had to define success. So define success as well. And then if it doesn't work, we're just going to have to go right back to, your old position. And so those are a couple of the rules that we have. And just no roles, responsibilities, those types of things.
Well, what you said is, because there's a lot of rules, right? And when you look and when you zoom out and you look at your business, there's rules around like, do I work on Sundays? Am I going to make trade-offs in certain areas of my life for money, right? Well, how does this rank in terms of, well, how much time am I going to spend with my family? How much attention can I give to my friends? I've found that as I've gotten more into this entrepreneurial journey, I have less and less time to spend with my friends. Well, that's a trade-off that, like, are you defining that up front, or are you just letting the business like define you and the things that you've done? So, at a big picture, it makes sense, but then you zoom in on a very individual, thing like hiring somebody or promoting somebody into a different position, and you still got to define the rules. And this is where that framework of case comes in, right? It makes sense on a small level. And then when you zoom back, it also makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're totally right. And then like you said, on the personal side, I've struggled with that historically. So I'm working on setting those rules in place on the personal side. So I always think about I'm always thinking about business. My mind never stops. And so when I've really thought about the rules for my business, but I need to do that on the personal front too.
Yeah. Well, we just jumped right into it, which I love, but let's back up for just a second. And I want to hear more about your background. I know you live in Chicago. I know you've done some cool stuff in fintech and sold some, parts of your company, which you've done pretty well on. And now you've got a business. So tell me a little bit about that journey from, how you got into this and your entrepreneurial, ventures.
Yeah. So, like you said, I was a salesperson, career salesperson after college. I was a terrible academic, so I'm not smart at all from an academic standpoint. I did not get good grades at all in college and high school. And, I just never remember getting good grades. It was always a struggle for me. But after college, I was good at in a sales interview, and I had a decent personality. So I just, went into sales. So I worked for a number of companies, probably 6 companies within like 3 to 5 years or something like that, in sales roles. Could never hold a job. I just didn't have passion for it whatsoever. But always at the same time trying different entrepreneurial things. Like I had a photo booth company that was like probably my first company. We did photo booths for weddings and stuff like that. And then I finally found something that I saw could generate residual income, which was credit card processing and merchant services. And I had read Rich Dad Poor Dad, of course, like everybody else. And so I felt like that was my first step in the journey. And so I had a friend that was super successful in business already, and I would always bring him ideas, and he would always say yes, no, whether he'd want to partner with me on it. And this one he was really interested in. And so I quit my job the day after our honeymoon, my wife and my honeymoon, when I was 26, and just started from there. Just started selling, merchant services to like restaurants, retail, nightclubs, those types of things in Chicago. Yeah. And then, so that was my early part of the journey. And then we ended up creating a point of sale system. So a software as a service platform. And I sold that eventually. I did pretty well on it. It wasn't like retirement money, but it was good. I had a few years to, not work and figure out what I wanted to do. And then I got into real estate, and there's so many micro stories within that. So I'll let you kind of ask questions based off of what I just said, I guess.
What caused you to sell this business and transition to real estate?
Oh, I hated it, man. I hated my customers. I hated the business, like my employee. Like, it was just a bad thing. It was what I was explaining to you, man. We didn't plan whatsoever. My partner didn't see, like, still probably to this day, the same person doesn't see like any value in setting your intentions, setting up expectations up front, setting goals, meeting on an annual basis, meeting on a quarterly basis. It was just like sell and service the merchants or the customers that you sell to, and that was it. And just kind of make up your own processes as you go. And so I don't buy like totally into the visionary and integrator stuff. Like, I think I'm part of both, but I am miserable when I'm in like a full integrator role. And I was in a full integrator role in that company, and also sales as well. But I was totally miserable, and it just didn't have the culture that I wanted. And I actually sold out pretty early. And a lot of people ask me why, but that would be my reasoning.
Well, the title of this show is called The Investor Frame, and you're familiar with the investor frame. Knowing what I know now, would I choose to opt in to this company, right? So, you made a decent chunk of change on that. So the question really is like, let's say your business is worth $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if somebody handed you $1 million, would you buy your business back? If the answer is no, well, you might be like opting in every single day. You had an awesome 6-word update a few weeks ago about like something about opting in versus like opting out. And that's the whole concept with the investor frame is, well, knowing what I know now, because things change. Sometimes we don't define the rules up front, or maybe we do define the rules up front and then we don't, our plan doesn't necessarily meet with reality. There's a disconnect there. And so you got to be able to ask yourself, knowing what I know now, would I choose to buy this business back? And also, I reserve the right to change my mind. I thought this maybe was a good idea at first, but then you realized that this was actually getting you further away from what you wanted in life. And so you sold the business.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And that's exactly what happened, and it didn't get me closer to what I wanted at all. Right. It was getting me further and further away every single day. And I would have never have bought that company for double of what I made on it if I was given the opportunity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So then you got into real estate, and I know, like you said, there's all sorts of micro stories, but like talk about where you're at today. Talk about what your business looks like today. And I know your partner, Tim, who's also involved with what we're doing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So I live in Chicago. Tim lives in California. So we're 50-50 partners. Our wholesale company operates in North Carolina, mainly Raleigh-Durham area. We also go out to like Greensboro and the Triad, but also Fayetteville as well. There's 11 of us total, including Tim and I. 10 are stateside. There's one that's a VA. We don't really see her as a VA, but she's a VA in Belize. We have one territory manager, 2 acquisitions managers, 2 dispo managers, 2 inspectors, 1 transaction coordinator. In 2021, we did about 21 deals, which was like our first like partial year in business. And then our first full year in business, which was 2022, we did 69 deals. This year, we're ramping up considerably. That should be over 100, I hope. Wow. But yeah, that's the current business where it stands today.
Mm-hmm. And so let's transition then into the solvable problem. And how do you think about your own personal solvable problem, and how does this business and some of the other investments and things that you're doing, how does it contribute to that?
Yeah, I mean, I had to write it down. I didn't know my solvable problem before, we started interacting. I mean, I kind of did. Since I sold my business, obviously I got super intentional, and I would ask myself, I didn't have a framework that I have now with rigging the game, but I had an idea of what it was, where before it was just like I had a scarcity complex and I just wanted to make as much money as possible. And that just leads to just depression, to be honest, and chaos. So after I sold my company, I started to think about things like what my solvable problem is. And then I have this framework now, which is great. But this company, I really do like the industry a lot. I love real estate and what it can do for people. But this solves my solvable problem by, on the left side, I would say, of the barbell, are, rentals, long-term rentals for us. And also, wholesaling, like our bread and butter wholesaling. And then I also own some merchant service portfolios still. So those still give me residuals. I'm good at buying and selling those. So that's like reliable residual. And then on the right side, the business gives us the opportunity to, take some risk and have some really high upside on like land entitlement, other things in real, like commercial stuff, different marketing methods within the wholesale company, like those types of things. So to answer your question, it's a great opportunity. Real estate's a great opportunity to have, I feel like, a balanced barbell, because you have your reliable, rentals on the left. And then there's so many ways you can skin real estate and, try to go big on the right. So, and that's kind of what we're doing right now.
That's great, man. So for those who aren't familiar with the barbell, and if you're listening to this show, you've probably heard us talk about the barbell because we talk about it every single time, but explain to me how you think of the barbell and what that means to you.
So, historically, obviously didn't have this framework. Like I said, I had a lot on the right side. So I had a lot, when I quit my job, it was like all on the right side. I didn't have anything on the left side at all. I guess I had my wife because she was paying, we were using her salary to live, but it was a very small amount. But the way I see it is it just gives me peace of mind knowing that I have this visual where I know I can kind of list everything out I have on the left side, and I can look at the amount that I have coming in on a regular basis from a monetary standpoint. That's really low risk, like really reliable, and I can feel comfortable because, like I said, I had scarcity issues, from growing up, and I just, need that personally. And if I didn't have this visual, I was just checking my bank accounts all the time, and like that's what I was doing. But now that I do, I can see that I'm actually working towards having a lot of reliability with the opportunity in order for me to have, in order for me to have energy in what I'm doing and have passion, I need to have that right side as well. And so I need to have that upside. So I can look at the barbell and say, okay, I'm good on the reliability side. Let's try this upside stuff.
Yeah.
And of course, obviously have my rules in place where I'm not just like betting the house on everything. Right. And so that's how I see it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
it does, man. And I relate to that so much because this visual of being able to just write it out. If you guys are following along, I mean, what we do inside the Whale Club and what we learned from Nick and Dan here is draw an actual barbell. We're all familiar with a barbell. The idea here is a lot of us either have a very lopsided barbell, like one side is significantly weighted more than the other, or you might be loading weight in the middle of the bar where you're taking bets that like as Mike was saying, you're betting the house. Yeah, if you're right, like, good for you. But why are you taking on all that unnecessary risk? And I think this is part of our the biases and the things that we carry for guys like ourselves. We're really high quick starts. We just want to go. Like, I just want to jump right to the strategy to go execute on. But what this visual has done for me is it pointed out, like, you got a lot of stuff on the upside side of the barbell. It sounds like the same thing happened for you.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it helps prevent me from absolute ruin, right? Like, because I am historically, I want to go hard on that upside,
right?
And on that right side. And my wife, like, we always tease because she's got the regular salary, everything coming in. She has no idea like what's going on in my business. She knows that we're doing well, obviously, but she's not like part of the business whatsoever. So if I just bet everything and, we lost our house and all of that, that would not be a good thing. So I need something like the barbell. And for me to be able to strategize for our family, for the future, and have all of those assets that are reliable on the left side and continue to build those, but also have those cool projects on the right side.
Mm-hmm. And it's about balance. And balance doesn't always mean equal. I think that's where people get, it doesn't mean that like 50% should be on the reliable side and 50% should be on the upside. It doesn't always work out that way. And I wanted to touch on something else. Dan has another equation, I suppose. He's a math nerd. So it makes total sense. But he says, and I think he got this from a guy named Chip Conley, says anxiety equals uncertainty times powerlessness. Let's talk about that equation for a second here, because I think that we've all, as entrepreneurs, we feel a certain level of anxiety. Am I going to be okay? Is the underlying question that we're all asking ourselves a lot of times, right?
Yeah.
And that question of, am I going to be okay? That anxiety that we feel, it's a function of having uncertainty, not knowing exactly what's it going to take to lock in the things that we want in life. Oftentimes we just get caught in this human mindset of chasing more and more and more. And when we have anxiety around that, right? If you can create a mechanism that that you're getting closer to the things that matter to you in life, your anxiety drops because your certainty goes up. Then you've got this other variable, powerlessness. And it's sort of, I think of powerlessness as like, what's the tool that I'm going to use to get me there? For a lot of us here, that's real estate. But there's other aspects that, tools that we can use to solve our problems. But talk to me a little bit about the anxiety that we feel as entrepreneurs with having uncertainty and not knowing exactly what tool to use.
Yeah, man. I mean, I know this so well, and that's why I was smiling like at the whole time that you were talking about it, because I've felt that for a really long time. It still creeps in for sure, right? I have all these tools and I have all of these things, but I always ask that question, like, am I going to be okay? And now I have the support of the frameworks and things like that we've gone over to lean back on and go look back at and be like, oh, I am okay. And you're doing right. You're doing a good job. You're being intentional. You're being a good shepherd of your money, your business, other people, your family, those types of things. That's what this like type of framework and having these processes and procedures in place really allows me to, just be free, feel weightless a little bit, because historically in my business, I didn't have these things. And I had no idea, what the next day was going to bring. If we were going to lose everything, I always felt like the other shoe was going to drop. And I didn't feel like I didn't have a system. So all I wanted to do was make more and more and more and more. And that just feels crappy as hell. And you just feel like, I don't know, your world's going to end, at any time. And so, like I said, going back around, like, this stuff is what keeps me at peace and sane in my business and my life.
Mm.
I really, really, value it.
Because that side of our brain that's asking us that question of, am I going to be okay? It's not going to go away.
Mm-hmm.
We're hardwired that way, right? And it's a survival based thing. Like our brains have evolved over thousands and thousands of years, and we had to have that in order to survive. Am I going to be okay? Well, because there's woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers coming after us, right? But that's not the case anymore. And that survival brain doesn't really serve us that well in business and entrepreneurship. And so if you don't have certainty and power, right? You need a system to tell that side of your brain that I get that you feel this way, but it's a good thing that we have tools and systems to process this with, right? And what I found is that instead of spinning out for like months at a time, which is what would happen to me, I would just go into these bouts of, I mean, I don't want to necessarily call it depression, but you just feel the weight of all these things and you're like, am I going to be okay? And that voice is so loud. I found that I just spin out much less. It went from like months to weeks to days, and now it's a matter of hours. And I can say,
Right.
oh, I know that feeling is really strong, but you have the tools, you have the community.
Yeah. I mean, it starts with, honestly, it also starts with like having the processes in place to evaluate different opportunities. For me, it's about like having the processes in place other than the barbell to evaluate opportunities, evaluate partnerships, because I've gotten into, because I was only driven by money historically, I've gotten into really bad situations where I've gotten, I've lost tons of money from fraudulent people more than one time. And I've also had, a day when I was like 28, our single line of business that we had at the time, we were making like 300 grand a month, and a bank just dropped that line of business. And we literally went from 300 grand a month to $20,000 a month in one day. And so I feel like those things happened to me for a reason, because I set those things up like that. And I didn't have the processes in place or like the barbell and different things in place to have that reliability and then have that upside on the right-hand side. I don't really know where I was going with that, but yeah, it's just having the processes and having this system is essential for me to operate.
I want to ask you about the timer model that we've talked about, because, money is a big important thing. And a lot of us, when we're trying to, solve our money problems, it's like a bull that sees red, it's like, I just need to get this financial stuff sorted. But how important is having clarity around like what actually matters to you? And I know that we've talked about timer many times around, well, actually we added an A on the end, right? So attention, time, impact or influence, money, energy, and then relationships or reputation. And what I've found is that when you can get clear on what actually matters to you, yes, of course, money matters. Like we get that. But there's other factors at play here. How does that play in with your solvable problem, and how you think about getting more of the currencies that you value?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm trying to get as much residual income as possible through rentals and through my old business, so that I can have time to be able to travel. Like that's my main thing. I know everybody, like a lot of people say travel, but I want to be able to have quality time. And I've heard you talk about this, and this like really hit home for me, because like everybody says they want more time with their kids, but it's more quality time with their kids. And that's what I want. Right. So time is huge for me. And I, want to build that residual income or predictable income, so that I can I need my space and I need to be an individual within my family. Like I'm a person that can't just be with a group of people all the time, even if it's my family. So I need my individual time. And so like something that's really important for me is to be able to make enough money where, you know, I can travel with my family and bring a nanny to be able to help with the kids and those types of things. So that my wife and I can go do things, experience wherever we're at together or individually.
Mm-hmm.
And so time is like my biggest thing outside of, you know, money, and reputation is and relationships huge with me as well.
Mm. Well, and you know, when you and I were in Clearwater several weeks back, we were talking about Dan's second wealth commandment, preference versus binary. How does that play in with, you know, the idea that some people have just different preferences? Like what you're saying right now is absolutely a preference. It's not a right or wrong thing. So like, how have you dealt with, you know, I guess, I say this as like, I'm a recovering people pleaser, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Same.
the,
I'm
the
working
hard
on it.
time is like, you have your own preferences, but not everyone's going to agree with that. Some people are going to be like, hey man, you're in the prime of your earning career. You should be working, doing all this stuff and yada, 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 telling
Yeah.
you what you should or shouldn't be doing. And how does preference play in with that versus this idea of there's a right or wrong way to do things?
Yeah, I mean, that blew my mind when I actually read it. I'm like, oh my God, there's so many things that I do because I fit, like in my mind, I make it seem like I have to and there's no other option. And then now I'm just able to look at things and be like, is that my preference? Is that going to get me closer to what I want? You know, some examples of that in my own life are like, you know, which I'm super happy I took in my business that I didn't like. You know, everybody asked me like, wow, you left a ton of money on the table. Why did you do that? Blah, blah, blah. And that decision could have seemed binary, but it was so bad at the time. I just used my preference, or like, I don't know, I just left. And that was a preference based decision in that, at that point. Other things in my life are like, you know, we have coaches in business, and we all have you know, we watch gurus and people and on YouTube that tell us we should be doing something in our business a certain way and that type of thing, and should be managing salespeople this way, and should be leading a salespeople or a sales huddle with this, you know, process. And some things we just take little things out of every recommendation or every thought process that someone gives to us, and use it, and we kind of mold it for our own business and for ourselves and our preferences. Ren is our coach. Ren is a phenomenal sales coach for us, but we're not Ren. We can't do all the things that he does from a sales perspective. And it wouldn't make sense for us. And so we just kind of use a lot of what he does, but we mold it in our own way for our own preferences. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And Dan talks about another thing that he talks about in this book is like, only innovate where you differentiate. And so there's a certain aspect of he sort of gave me the permission to just copy things, right? If you've got clarity, like this is the type of business I want to build. Well, if you've got somebody that's built a successful business like that, why don't you just copy what works? And instead find areas where you differentiate and then innovate there, right? Like you don't necessarily innovate, let's say, on the process to pull data and to get it into the CRM and to send it out and yada, 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 all this sort of stuff. But there are going to be areas where we differentiate with other people. And that is where we should spend our time innovating and injecting our own preferences and things like this. But when Dan told me, like, you have permission to copy the things that are already working. If you don't differentiate, stop trying to inject your own like opinions. And it's like, just do it the way that it's worked for these people and find your own ways to differentiate inside of that.
Yeah. And that's exactly what I do. And I've always done that kind of naturally. But now I can, describe it with the actual, like you have. That's exactly what I do. And that's honestly probably what's made me successful so far.
Mm, that's good, man. So we talked about the barbell, and we talked about, you've got rentals and wholesaling and your merchant services, and, your wife works and she's got some reliability there.
Mm-hmm.
And you talked about how you're taking some bigger swings on, land entitlements and different things like that. Is there anything that you have noticed through this process where you are loading the weight in the middle of the bar, either where, you've got unpredictable parts of your business that you're trying to make more reliable, or things where maybe your downside is still pretty big? Now there's a lot of upside, but your downside, you're still sort of exposed. So where have you noticed things that maybe are loaded in the middle of the bar that you need to push to one side or the other?
Oh man, I wish I would have met you and done this like 6 months ago, because I'm in the middle of something right now. I've made a heavy investment. It's a startup. It has a lot of, like, I guess you would say, pre-orders. And so it's got a lot of potential, but it is super, super risky. And I'm essentially the money behind the operation. So I'm just funding this thing that's not bringing any income in at this point. And so I have a lot of fear around that. And I don't think I would have made that decision, if I had read this book beforehand and joined the group beforehand. I think it's got a lot of upside. I still think it has a ton of potential, but it's pretty damn risky. Mm. So that's for sure in the middle for me.
Yeah. And what I found is I had a lot of those bets as well. And sometimes the answer is, well, let me tell you the psyche of like a lot of us who like to take risks, and maybe you can resonate with this. We hear this opportunity where, like, you can make a 10x, 50x, 100x on your money. So what do we think? We're like, all right, well, let me push a lot of chips into the middle on that. Right. But the best part about an asymmetrical bet to the upside is that you don't need to bet very much on it. But of course, we hear this opportunity to make all this money, and our brains, for some reason, are just like, well, then I'll push more into that, And I don't quite understand why we do that. I don't think that we need to understand why we do that. We just know that we do. And so, that's sort of how I noticed as well. I was taking big bets on things that had big upside, but the downside of being wrong is massive.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm in the middle of it right now. So I'll let you know how it goes. I have done things though, like since getting to know you and the Whale Club and reading the book, to de-risk my bet a little bit. So I've changed like the money that I'm investing. If like the business folds, it's turning into a note, so that, the two people that are also involved in the company will be paying me back over a certain period of time. So that's one thing that kind of de-risks it, but I don't want to have to go after them for the money. But that was just an option and something I thought about after we read the book.
Well, that's what it is, right? Is now we got to go back through. Dan calls it an archaeological dig. It's like, okay, let's look at all the bets. Let's dig up all the places where we're making bets and figure out how to take risk off the table. That's what the barbell does. Is it's like saying, not like we're saying don't take these upside bets. We're just saying, how do we take them with very little risk in the deal? How do we make it so that if we're wrong, no big deal. If we're right, like, fantastic, you hit that 10x. It might mean just putting less into it.
For sure. But you don't want to be in the position, I'd rather be in the position up front, like we talked about earlier, to opt in opposed to opting out. You know what I mean? So like my next thing is I'll have to opt out if it doesn't work, or if it's like just stagnant for a really long time. I'd rather first and foremost do all my due diligence, my processes up front, than be in a position where, I'm already in it. But this is where we're at. And like you said, we can use Dan's tools and kind of reorganize our commitment and de-risk a little bit if you're already in it. So that's great as well. I mean, I feel a lot more comfortable now that I was able to do that, and I didn't even think about it before I read the book.
Yeah, he says this thing in there. We want to take bets with the least amount of risk, least amount of effort, most amount of options. And when I think of optionality, it's sort of like you have all these potential options that you can opt in to, right? We're going to get to this here in the next couple of weeks and just really how you create this type of optionality. But that's the idea, is we want to have, like, I can choose to opt in here. I can choose to opt in here. I can choose to opt in here. And I'm going to pick the one that's the least amount of risk and the least amount of effort, because that is oftentimes we make decisions because of more. But really what we want to do is we want to make decisions that give us more optionality, because then we have the ability to pick the best one and opt in versus having to opt out of things.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, you'll just be so much more successful if you go at problems and businesses in that manner, for sure. Just opting into things that make sense for you and get closer to what you want.
Yep. So I like to finish by asking for like a lesson learned. And we've talked a lot about lessons learned up to this point, but like, what would you say is your, maybe your most influential lesson you've learned either throughout your career or maybe in the last couple months joining the Whale Club? What would you say that would be?
So, I've got a couple lessons learned. I mean, I have a lot of lessons learned, but I go into partnerships a lot, like I told you. So just, again, setting the rules as my 6-word update. If you don't set the rules up front, it can be an absolute mess, and it probably will be an absolute mess. You're killing your likelihood of success without setting rules up front, setting your intentions and those types of things. So only go into partnerships where the other partner is willing to take the time and value those rules that you put in place. Because you can put rules in place up front, but have the wrong partner who doesn't value that type of thing, who thinks let's go, let's get started without doing this. And that's the wrong partner, because it's just you're just going to end up chasing that person around. And there's not going to be any intentionality, and probably won't be successful in that business.
That's so good, man. So take time to define the rules ahead of time, especially in partnerships. It's caused me a ton of headache trying to undo things later, trying to opt out, as opposed to let's just lay the cards on the table and decide if we both want to opt in.
It gets super weird too, in some partnerships, if things aren't working out and, I don't know, one person invested more money and you didn't even talk about how much money each of you were going to invest, and then the business doesn't work, does that person get paid back more? It's just so weird. And it just isn't necessary if you just take the right steps up front.
That's great, man. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Hopefully everybody got a lot out of this. I certainly did. And we like to finish by encouraging everyone to use the investor frame. So knowing what you know now, and the conversation that Mike and I just had, and the things that he laid out, the lessons he, has shared with us, what changes do you need to make in your business or your investments to help you get closer to the things that you want? So everybody, thank you so much for tuning into today's show. Definitely go check out Mike and Venture Stack, Mike and Tim. They're just doing some amazing things. Give those guys a follow along with what they're doing. And tune in next week. We're going to have another couple episodes coming out. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you guys on the next show.